When I moved into Mason's apartment, I told myself it was just temporary, a few months until I got back on my feet after the breakup. But the first night there, as we laughed over cheap takeout and an old movie we'd both seen 100 times, I knew temporary was going to feel a lot like home. Mason had always been easy to be around. We met in college. He was the loud, confident type who could talk to anyone, while I preferred to listen from the edges of the room. He was straight, or at least that's what everyone, including him, believed without question. He dated girls effortlessly, his charm as casual as breathing. I, on the other hand, had just walked away from a 3-year relationship that left me questioning what love actually looked like. The apartment itself was small but warm, 2 bedrooms, a shared kitchen, and a balcony that overlooked a busy street. At night, the sound of passing cars filled the silence neither of us liked to acknowledge. There was a comfort in that rhythm, a reminder that life went on, even when you weren't sure where yours was heading. Our routines fell into place quickly. Mornings were quiet, Mason at the gym before sunrise, me nursing coffee and trying to piece together freelance work. Evenings were louder. He'd cook dinner, I'd do the dishes, and we'd talk about everything from music to politics to which pizza place had the best crust. It was domestic in a way that felt almost dangerous, too intimate for 2 men who weren't supposed to need each other like that. I noticed things I shouldn't have. The way his laugh always came a second too late when he was tired. The small scar on his jaw he got from high school baseball. The scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway after he left for work. These weren't romantic observations, not at first, just tiny details that made sharing a space feel personal. But soon, they became the things I looked for each day. Mason had a girlfriend, Ava. She was polite, distant, and beautiful in a way that seemed untouchable. When she visited, the apartment filled with perfume and small talk. I'd retreat to my room, pretending to be busy, though I could hear their laughter through the thin wall. Sometimes, when the noise stopped, I'd imagine what it would be like to be wanted that simply, without confusion, without fear. One night, after Ava left abruptly during an argument, Mason sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen. "She says I'm emotionally unavailable," he muttered, half to himself. "Are you?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Maybe. I don't always know what I'm supposed to feel." It was the first time he'd ever sounded unsure of himself, and something about it drew me closer. I wanted to say I understood, that feeling too much could hurt just as much as feeling nothing. But I stayed silent, afraid that comfort might be mistaken for something else. After that night, things shifted in ways I couldn't name. We talked later, laughed harder, stayed up later. Sometimes, his hand would brush mine when we reached for the same bowl of popcorn, and neither of us would pull away immediately. Little moments, accidental, innocent, but heavy with implication. I told myself it was nothing. He was my friend. Straight. Safe. Then came the rainy night in early March. The power went out mid-movie, plunging the room into darkness except for the flicker of a single candle. Mason found it funny at first, his voice echoing off the walls as he fumbled for his phone flashlight, but eventually, the laughter faded. We ended up sitting close, listening to the rain hit the balcony. The room smelled like wet earth and candle wax. "It's weird," he said softly. "How easy this feels. Like we've been doing this forever." I looked at him, the shadows cutting across his face. "Yeah," I whispered. "It does." Neither of us spoke again. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. His eyelids drooped, head leaning against the couch cushion. Within minutes, he was asleep, his head falling gently onto my shoulder. I didn't move. I just sat there, heart pounding, caught between the warmth of his breath and the cold realization that something invisible had crossed a line. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, the candle burned low, its flame trembling. That night, something changed between us, quiet, almost imperceptible, but real enough that I felt it in the way he exhaled against my skin. I told myself it was nothing. Just comfort. Just exhaustion. But as I stared into the dim light, I knew better. Something had started, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The morning after blurred into ordinary motions, yet nothing felt ordinary to Ethan. He moved through the cabin with deliberate calm, helping Ryan clear dishes, laughing at stories that rolled too easily from his friend's tongue. But beneath every word, beneath every breath, a secret pulsed between him and Mark, silent and undeniable. Mark behaved as though nothing had happened. His voice carried the same measured tone, his posture as steady as ever. He asked Ryan about his classes, about the next football practice, about things that belonged in the safe rhythm of father and son. To Ethan, however, every glance felt heavy, every word a reminder of the night they had crossed a line. When Ryan left to fetch more firewood, the silence between Ethan and Mark returned, unspoken yet thick. Mark busied himself with the coffee pot, pouring dark liquid into 2 mugs. He slid one toward Ethan without a word. Their fingers did not touch this time, but the absence of contact made the memory of it sharper. Ethan stared into the swirling steam, forcing his voice steady. "Do you regret it?" Mark's hand stilled on the counter. He did not look up immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were cautious, weighed down by something Ethan couldn't read fully. "I don't regret feeling it," he said at last. "But I regret what it means." Ethan swallowed. The words cut more deeply than silence would have. "Because of Ryan." "Because of everything," Mark corrected, his jaw tightening. "This isn't a road either of us can walk without consequence." The conversation ended as Ryan returned, arms full of wood, breaking the fragile honesty. Ethan forced a smile, but his stomach coiled tight. He told himself he could bear it, that the memory of one night would fade with distance. Yet every shared glance across the room told him otherwise. The day unfolded in fragments. They hiked along the wet shoreline once the rain eased, Ryan bounding ahead with the energy of someone oblivious to shadows. Mark trailed behind, steady and quiet, and Ethan found himself caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and longing. At one point, Ryan climbed a fallen log, balancing precariously as he shouted some challenge back to Ethan. Ethan laughed, but his eyes shifted instinctively toward Mark, who watched his son with a fondness softened by fatigue. Their gazes met for only a second before Mark looked away, but in that instant Ethan felt the gravity of what they shared, something unspeakable, something that would not vanish. That night, the cabin was quieter. Ryan stayed up late on his phone, stretched out on his bed upstairs. Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the dim firelight, waiting without admitting to himself what he was waiting for. Mark appeared at the doorway, his presence filling the room even before he spoke. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You should try to sleep," Mark said. "I can't," Ethan admitted. For a long moment, neither moved. The unspoken promise of the previous night hung between them, dangerous and magnetic. Mark finally stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This can't become a habit. You know that." Ethan nodded, though the ache in his chest deepened. "But you still came." Mark's silence was answer enough. He sat across from Ethan, the distance deliberate this time. His eyes lingered, but his hand stayed firmly in his lap. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice carrying both sternness and softness. "What happened, it can't define you. Or me." It was a moment, not a path. Ethan nodded again, though the words only tangled further in his mind. He wanted to believe him, yet every glance, every pause, every heartbeat told him the storm wasn't over, it had only changed form. When Ryan's footsteps creaked above, both men fell silent. The moment dissolved into stillness, leaving only the fire to fill the space. Mark rose first, retreating toward the hall without another word. Ethan sat alone, the embers glowing faintly, his thoughts louder than the crackle of wood. He knew the weekend would end, the cabin would empty, and life would resume. But something had been carved into him, into them both, and though he didn't know where it would lead, he knew this wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning of a silence they would carry, one secret, 2 hearts, and a storm that refused to pass. The days that followed blurred into a careful routine, but Daniel could not shake the feeling that every moment carried hidden weight. He still laughed at Michael's dry jokes, still helped fold laundry, still joined him at Sunday dinners with Michael's parents. Yet beneath the surface, each action felt rehearsed, as if he were playing a role in a play where one wrong line could shatter the set that he thought the guilt might dull with time, but instead, it sharpened. The silence between them, once merely dull, now pulsed with accusation. Every time Michael smiled without suspicion, Daniel felt both relief and dread. Relief that his secret remained buried, dread that he was building a life on a fault line that could erupt without warning. One evening, Daniel found himself staring at Michael as he read on the sofa, glasses perched lightly on his nose, a lamp casting a soft halo around him. Michael looked peaceful, almost boyish in his concentration. Daniel felt his throat close, the thought rising unbidden, I don't deserve him. The weight of that truth made him set down his drink, his hand trembling slightly. Later that night, he dreamt of Ethan. Not of the act itself, but of the way Ethan had looked at him across the bar, like he mattered, like he was still capable of sparking desire. When he woke, the image lingered, and Daniel wondered which haunted him more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that part of him longed for that validation again. At work, he struggled to focus. Deadlines slipped by, and colleagues noticed his distracted air. His sketches lacked their usual boldness, his presentation stumbled. When his manager asked if everything was all right, Daniel forced a smile and claimed he was just tired. It was the same lie he told Michael, the same mask he wore for everyone who couldn't see the fracture beneath. One night, while clearing away dinner plates, Michael asked casually, "Are you happy?" The question landed with such force that Daniel nearly dropped the dishes. He managed a laugh, shaky and forced. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" But Michael's eyes lingered on him, searching, as though he sensed a shift he couldn't name. Daniel retreated to the balcony afterward, the night air cool against his skin. He realized then that secrecy had a way of isolating, of fencing him off from the very person he lived with. Michael's presence was steady, but Daniel felt increasingly apart, as though the secret had built a wall invisible to anyone else. That he began to notice cracks in Michael too. The long hours, the exhaustion etched into his features, the way his laughter came less easily these days. Perhaps they had both been drifting long before Ethan entered the picture. Perhaps the betrayal was not the cause but the symptom of something neither had confronted, yet the thought offered no comfort. It only made the silence heavier. One weekend, they attended a friend's birthday party. Surrounded by chatter and clinking glasses, Daniel watched Michael interact with old university friends, animated and relaxed in a way Daniel hadn't seen in months. He realized with a pang that Michael was still capable of lightness, still capable of connection. The problem wasn't Michael alone, it was the distance Daniel had allowed to grow between them. Walking home, Michael slipped his arm through Daniel's, a gesture so familiar it nearly broke him. Daniel forced a smile, but inside, he was unraveling. He wanted to confess, to lay the truth bare and see whether their relationship could withstand the weight. But fear held him back. Fear of destroying what little remained, fear of becoming the villain in a story they had once built together. That night, lying awake again, Daniel understood something he hadn't before. The secret wasn't going away. It had embedded itself in their life, shaping his choices, coloring his thoughts, shadowing every tender moment. And unless he faced it, through confession, or change, or some reckoning yet unknown, it would consume not only his love for Michael but also the version of himself he still wanted to be. The echo of that night with Ethan no longer lived only in memory, it lived in every silence, every hesitation, every breath beside the man he loved.